So I was Facebooking, and I came across this cause posted by a Muslim friend. So we got into an interesting discussion about it, which I have heavily annotated. Here is the cause. Google Inc. should block all content related to the disrespect of Prophet Muhammad. No one has the right to disrespect any religion or any particular group of people. This is the line I focused on. Related to the disrespect of the Prophet. Wouldn't that include the petition itself? But the petition has a much more serious contradiction involved, which I'll get to later. It continues, "This war against Muslims should stop and the world should become peaceful." This last sentence I didn't notice, so I didn't touch on it in this little exchange, although it is, of course, extremely stupid. The world should become peaceful. It's like dealing with a particularly slow child. The world won't change itself, and it won't become peaceful by itself. People have to make it peaceful. A good way to create a peaceful world is to condemn acts of violence, not acts of criticism, which consist entirely of words, and do not consist of blowing things up. So anyway, I opened with this. What if your religion says you can disrespect the religions of others? This isn't just semantics, this is a real dilemma. You either let people criticize religions freely, or you infringe religious freedom to criticize, which is itself a form of disrespect. And the solution that the people pushing this cause want to give is half of the problem. Protects the religions with the most political clout, i.e., the ones who blow shit up a lot. There is no principle of protection of religious immunity from mockery and disrespect in the minds of the would-be lawmakers, and there never has been. It's nothing more than a purely pragmatic way of trying to appease the thuggish and violent mobs of Islam, while trying to make the law a general one in order to disguise the improvised nature of the attempted legislation. It's also a short-term solution to a long-term problem, like removing a wound from sight rather than treating it. Islam and the West cannot undo their meeting. To act like the Rushdie affair, the Danish cartoons, and now this Innocence of Muslims incident, are merely the result of crass and hasty action on the part of individuals is foolish. It's a war of ideas. It's a clash between secularism and religious totalitarianism. It's about having an open or closed society. Those who favour free speech want an open society. Those who want no free speech, or free speech which is compromised to protect the interest of large gangs, are enemies of the open society. Back to my dilemma. Part of the problem is that religions are very easy to create, meaning that almost anyone can invoke a religion to avoid mockery. Just look at Mormonism, for instance, and all the other wacky cults hanging around. We know that Joseph Smith was a fraud, and we know precisely how he pulled off his trickery. Scholars of religion nevertheless class Mormonism and all these other cults as religions. Are we really going to immunize all of them from disrespect? What about the weird ones whose 4 or so adherents believe in alien abductions and other such nonsense? What if we had the Church of Religious Deprecation? A church that reminds men that there is no God and mocks religions which worship God or gods. If you don't allow religions to disrespect each other, then you inevitably step on the toes of religious freedom, which seems to me disrespectful. Legislating against mockery of all religion cannot be done without contradiction, because religion is so ubiquitous and varied. But I suspect that was never the point. The point is to smooth over tensions with Islam. One possible solution to my dilemma is to sidestep these problems, as my friend did thusly. It doesn't, we're not allowed, especially the Abrahamic faiths, because if I disrespected the Jews and Christians, I am disrespecting Jesus and David and Moses, whom are all prophets of Islam too. Now, I didn't ask my friend about his particular religion. I was attempting to pose a problem based on a thought experiment. However, the answer, pointing to features of one's own religion, seems to underscore the underlying motive of this petition. The point isn't to secure protection for all religions. The point is to protect Islam and appease Muslims and just hope the violence stops. It's a hasty solution which doesn't address the problem. Not all religions are enemies of the open society. Jainism, for instance, doesn't seem to be really worth mocking or debunking, since it isn't trying to legislate universal nakedness or fine people who accidentally kill bugs. It doesn't make the mistake of trying to force its own values onto everyone. I didn't think that I stated my dilemma very well, since I didn't make myself understood, so I stated it again, perhaps more clearly. What if there was a religion which had a criticize other religions ceremony? You either allow it to do so, which goes against trying to quell criticism, or you don't allow it, which means infringing on someone else's religion. This is hypothetical, but what's to stop me inventing my own religion? People do it all the time. I made one mistake I ought to have kept with disrespect rather than criticism, but simply didn't realize, and I oscillated a few times between these two words, although it seems that for many Muslims these two things are one and the same. Anyway, the dilemma to me seems to be the same either way. Trying to quell criticism, or ridicule of religion, is a self-refuting enterprise, and for the same reason. I gave the hypothetical church of religious deprecation. However, there's no real need to do this when there are real-life cases. What about the pastor Terry Jones, who was going to have a Quran burning? Surely he could claim this as a religious duty if he wanted to. What would religion be without religious hatred and bigotry? Hasn't anyone heard of the Crusades? It's also easy to get rights based on an invented religion, as this Pastafarian headgear demonstrates. My friend grasped the problem I wanted to pose, and he replied, "But if you made a religion with the simple reason to criticize the faith of others, then there are flaws. A religion has a more higher moral purpose. For example, spreading equality, peace, and morals back into society that were lost." Well, of course it's easy to think of cases where religious criticism is a religious requirement, but there are other problems too. Now, this friend of mine is a pretty nice guy. I've challenged him a few times on Islam, and he never gives me the standard "you're a shrill atheist" line. Still, this answer was pretty poor, and I couldn't resist ripping Islam a new one in my next comment, but before I show that, consider the statement, religion has a higher moral purpose. It's circular. Criticism is disallowed. Making a religion to criticize religion is disallowed. So how can a person know that religion has a higher moral purpose if they haven't heard the criticisms and thought about them? If no one is allowed to mention the terrorism, the child rape, and the all-round oppression, then the case for the higher moral purpose of this particular religion is still waiting to be made, and the peace and equality that were lost. This is very devious reasoning. When a system fails, it's no good saying that the system was not adhered to closely enough. For example, communism. It failed in Russia. It's no good saying that it's because the Russians didn't follow communism closely enough. And yet there is a strain of Islamic narrative that seeks to explain away every problem by saying that things would be better if only they could eradicate, yet more thoroughly, alcohol and drugs and promiscuity in countries where these things are already tantamount to suicide. Well, people must be engaging in these things, since we have so many problems. This reasoning is ad hoc and uninformative. The problem is not the incomplete application of the system, the problem is the system itself. And given religious corruption, it could well be the case that the Church of Religious Deprecation has a real point to make, giving it a higher moral purpose. So any attempt to quell criticism or ridicule simply collapses in on itself. There is a glaring contradiction in attempting to legislate against criticism or mockery of religion. The problem is that religions are too easy to create and too ridiculous. These two things taken together make mockery both intellectually and morally essential and impossible to prevent. To truly avoid mocking religion, we would have to dispense with mockery entirely, since near enough anything can be a religion. We need criticism and we need ridicule. The line, "no one has the right to disrespect any religion," is blatantly false, unless you live in a closed, totalitarian society where nothing works, and people do nothing but study the Quran and stone each other for showing too much leg. But we live in an open society. Mocking bad ideas is the best corrective to the countless forms of intellectual filth whose prolificacy is a direct result of the open society. And lest anyone think I'm arguing in a circle, I do go on to demonstrate that Islam really is morally and intellectually empty, as follows. All religions are flawed, that's why we criticize them. It's also why people try to make criticizing religion illegal. Criticizing science isn't illegal, because science can stand up to criticism. Religion cannot, so it tries to protect itself via legislation. There are flaws in people who believe in the faith, not the faith itself. For example, if you probably pointed out a flaw in Islam, it's probably not a flaw within itself, it's a flaw within the people who believe in Islam and take things out of context to suit their needs. No, sex with 9-year-olds is a flaw, which only an apologist would try to harmonize. This is why people like me take the time to criticize faith. To have a religion with such a glaring error in it, and then to demand this religion be exempt from criticism, is absurd and morally wrong. Not according to the culture at the time, though. Morality is subjective, not objective. For example, a woman to dress the way they do would be completely morally wrong just around 100 years ago in this country. There are people who believe homosexuality is morally wrong, and it is morally wrong for us British to accept gay people, and we believe that countries like Iran are morally wrong for not accepting them. The concept of marriage was different in the time of the Prophet due to the culture. Secondly, the age of Aisha cannot be known because of the unreliable texts. All we can know for definite was that she was young. Well, a simple glance at Wikipedia will tell you that Aisha was first raped at age 9, and it's not consummation, it's child rape. Before anyone says Wikipedia is useless, is it really possible that such a misrepresentation could possibly take place, given the sensitive context? If it had no basis, it would be slanderous and it would never have made it onto an objective website. It's there because it's true, and no one denies it. One source is Karen Armstrong, a noted defender of religion. What we normally get, and what my friend normally offers, is a hasty admission that Mohammed was in fact a paedophile, followed by various appeals to context. This is the most morally offensive thing of all, attempting to justify the unjustifiable. Just do a YouTube search, it's full of this bullshit. I'll provide some links also. Everyone was doing it. Well, my friend continues, but it's like what Mary Midgley's case in her writing, trying out the new sword. Is it possible to judge another time and culture using our own morals? I agree with what you are saying more so than before, but personally I have a small issue with judging other cultures using our own standards. What standards do we then use in order to establish the goodness of Muhammad and Allah in the first place? Well, anyway, I said the following. Why am I not excoriating the crimes of Genghis Khan or some other warlord? Because no one is trying to make his life a basis for a religion, so there is little point. When you say that someone is completely without sin, despite the fact that they killed and molested children, you invite mockery. My friend then said, I agree there, I suppose. I didn't convert him, obviously, despite this unexpected concession, perhaps just a sign he was tired of arguing, but he did at least listen and try and argue. However, if he and others like him are successful with his cause, arguments like these will not be possible. I'll end this section by quoting the eminent YouTuber Dazzletac, who puts these things more eloquently than I can. Everyone has the right to dissent from the madness of mobs. To want a set of ideas protected from criticism is outrageous in a democracy. What these idiots are campaigning for is an affront to democracy and freedom of speech. The truth has nothing to fear from dissent. Why not simply prove that what you say is true, rather than seeking to stop people asking? Should we stop Muslims from speaking out against things they find offensive? No. Islam makes many offensive claims and causes some adherents to kill. Imagine a petition to criminalize religious attacks on free speech. The problem is that they don't just want immunity from being offended, they want the right to offend others protected. They want to stand on corners and tell people that gay people are evil, and criminalize anyone who disagrees with them. It's absolutely disgusting that in 2012 there are people who want to criminalize criticism of stupid ideas. My question is this: why does the West fight to protect Islam from criticism? Why do some self-styled liberals treat religion as sacrosanct? The political parties in my country, while not being as theocratic as the American right, nonetheless never fail to pay lip service to the great faith traditions. It's simply a category mistake. A faith is a series of beliefs, which are almost certainly false, even if one of them is true. There are so many that any given faith is infinitely likely to be false. And faith can also be changed. A faith is not like race or sexual orientation. Faith is an idea. Ideas are not people. Ideas can be scrutinized, attacked, mocked, abused, and refuted. Ideas don't need to be pandered to. Good ideas can stick up for themselves. It's considered politically incorrect to mock faith based on this rather egregious and obvious category error. Why the great faith traditions? Why not also the great historical ideologies? Why not also existentialism and postmodernism? Things that are distinguishable from nothing. The answer is, I think, that the great faith traditions need this extra padding in the age of information, but the cat is out of the bag. The liberal Westerners who think that Islam should be exempt from criticism are a strange, perhaps false kind of liberal. It's easy to see why conservatives think this. But anyway, they are so far left that they play perfectly into the hands of the right. They are tolerant in the wrong way, in a self-refuting way. There is a certain paradox to tolerance. This was recognized by Karl Popper, who wrote, "The so-called paradox of freedom is the argument that freedom, in the sense of absence of any constraining control, must lead to very great restraints, since it makes the bully free to enslave the meek. The idea is, in a slightly different form, and with a very different tendency, clearly expressed in Plato. Less well known is the paradox of tolerance. Unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. If we extend unlimited tolerance, even to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed, and tolerance with them. In this formulation, I do not imply, for instance, that we should always suppress the utterance of intolerant philosophies, as long as we can counter them by rational argument and keep them in check by public opinion. Suppression would certainly be unwise. But we should claim the right to suppress them, if necessary, even by force, for it may easily turn out that they are not prepared to meet us on the level of rational argument, but begin by denouncing all argument. They may forbid their followers to listen to rational argument because it is deceptive, and teach them to answer arguments by the use of their fists or pistols. We should therefore claim, in the name of tolerance, the right not to tolerate the intolerant. We should claim that any movement preaching intolerance places itself outside the law, and we should consider incitement to intolerance and persecution as criminal in the same way we should consider incitement to murder or to kidnapping or to the revival of the slave trade as criminal. In short, we should be as tolerant of the intolerant as much as is possible, but not more. We cannot be so tolerant that tolerance itself is undermined. The Westerners who would be so tolerant as to allow men to beat their wives for refusing to wear a veil, because that's how they do things over there, and who believe in group autonomy over individual autonomy, cannot properly be called liberal. They can only be called confused. The demand that anyone suspend their critical faculties is obviously spurious, but when the demand is designed to shield a backward and fascistic faith system based on the life of a child-raping warlord, the only credible retort is to heap more of the same scorn and ridicule that the fundamentalist Muslims and categorically confused liberals want to silence. The West must learn to stare down demands to quell its critical faculties in the name of respect in order to remain what it is. This was true when the Rushdie affair occurred, and has not changed, even if the quality of the work in question has. Freedom of speech extends to babbling idiots, mediocre movie makers, and theocratic fascists, which is fortunate for the would-be censors. The reason liberal democracy is better than an Islamic ideology is because liberalism is a great protector of Islam in the West. It's a protector of all ideologies, but it has to protect them from each other and not allow any one group to impose beliefs unique to them on anyone else. The strong liberalism which does not yield to threats of violence is better than the quasi-liberalism which attempts to smooth over problems by bending its own rules, and for the same reason. It is a stronger protector of diversity and the open society. It means that Muslims can never be coerced out of their religion by a sudden change of power. This is not true of quasi-liberalism, who, if they had their way, would yield to Islam the open society. This did begin to happen with Labour in England. It is in fact the new atheism which has in fact killed this category mistake, and secularism is regaining some of its losses. Muslims flourish in Europe, and the vast majority are good and peaceful, but many well-meaning and fairly moderate Muslims share this common category mistake, that religion deserves protection in the same way race, gender, and disability do. It simply doesn't. Religion deserves no more protection than my belief that Karl Popper was successful in solving the problem of induction, or that Rachmaninoff was the greatest composer of the 20th century.